Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this WindEurope webinar, where WindEurope are launching our new report on wind energy and economic recovery in Europe. I am Giles Dixon, the CEO of WindEurope, and to start presenting our report to you, it's my pleasure to give the floor to Pierre Tardieu, the Chief Policy Officer of WindEurope. Pierre, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Giles, and good morning, everyone. The EU is facing unprecedented times, and we're at a crossroads. The EU needs to face a dual challenge, address the unprecedented economic crisis that we're dealing with, and at the same time do this in a way that addresses our pre-existing structural challenges. Fighting climate change is the first and foremost pre-existing challenge, and wind is going to play a key part in addressing this particular challenge. According to the European Commission's long-term decarbonization strategy, wind will be up to 50% of Europe's power in 2050. As you can see on this slide, according to the International Energy Agency, offshore wind and onshore wind will be the top key delivering technologies in terms of power production. Now, what does this mean in terms of the European economy? Now, wind energy represents 300,000 jobs in the EU. That's all the people in the factories across Europe doing the development, doing the finance, doing the cutting-edge research and development. 300,000 jobs in all regions of Europe. 75% of these jobs are onshore today, and 25% of these jobs are offshore. What does this mean in terms of contribution to the European economy? The EU, the wind industry represents 37 billion in terms of contribution to the EU economy every year. This means that every single turbine that is installed, on average, contributes 10 million euros in terms of economic activity. This is all the activities around the wind energy, the production, but also the development, the planning, the financing, the civil works, logistics, etc., etc. Of course, this is in large part due to the competitive edge of European companies. In fact, the EU leads the world in terms of wind technology today. 5 of the top 10 onshore wind manufacturers are European, and we also lead in Europe the world when it comes to offshore wind technology. In fact, the European technology providers have a 42% global market share in wind technology. This is thanks to the industrial footprint of the European wind industry, with 248 manufacturing plants across Europe. And in fact, it's possible for these manufacturing plants to ramp up capacity and as they have the ability to meet increasing demand going forward. Now, of course, this is a significant challenge going forward. The EU long-term decarbonization strategy shows that the contribution of wind will need to increase dramatically, both onshore and offshore. And in the 1.5 tech scenario, that means going from today's levels to 1,200 gigawatt of capacity installed in the EU. Of course, this is manageable, and the industry has proven to be extremely resilient in the crisis. The first semester has represented an unprecedented challenge for the economy as a whole and for the wind industry in particular. In spite of the very challenging conditions, in spite of the challenges in moving across borders, in having certainty on economic outlook, in disruptions to the supply chain, the wind industry managed to install 5.1 gigawatts of capacity in the first semester, comparable with previous years. What is more, The finance community continued with a very strong vote of confidence for the industry by acknowledging 14 billion euros in terms of new investments. All in all, the wind industry was able to meet 17% of Europe's electricity demand in the first semester. That means that the wind industry really rose to the challenge in challenging times and kept delivering. We've seen in the past, following the European Plan for Strategic Investments, also known as the Juncker Plan, that the wind industry was perfectly placed in order to help kickstart the economy. In fact, under the Juncker Plan, there were 8 billion euros of investments in wind energy in the immediate aftermath of the great financial crisis. And it's critical now that Europe makes a strategic choice for wind as part of its recovery and builds on this experience going forward to kickstart the economy and meet our climate challenge.
Thank you, Pierre. Now, to respond to what you've heard so far, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to give the floor to Diederik Samson, Chef de Cabinet to Frans Timmermans. Diederik, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And indeed, an impressive performance by the energy industry in these challenging times. We've been put to the same challenge as the European community as a whole. The question was, when COVID-19 entered our world and turned our world upside down, the question was, do we stick to the long-term objectives of climate change, or do we shelve them and completely direct all our attention to the urgent matter of the health and the economic crisis? And I'm happy to tell you that we didn't fall for that knee-jerk reflex. And actually, we did the opposite. We pressed fast forward on the Green Deal. And for good reason, because the Green Deal is our growth strategy. It was presented as a growth strategy already before COVID-19 entered our world, and now we even need it more than ever, including wind energy. As your graphs have shown, wind energy will play an enormous role in the energy system, especially in the electricity system, obviously, in Europe to come, in 2030 and 2050, when we deem to be climate neutral. And that's also why the European Commission not only pressing fast forward on the Green Deal as a whole, but will also dedicate specific attention and funds to wind energy. We plan to come out next month with the offshore strategy, offshore energy as a whole, of which offshore wind is obviously the main part at the moment, trying to take down regulatory hurdles for cross-border projects, mustering new funds, especially in the context of the new next generation EU package of 750 billion. And at the same time, we need to increase our onshore wind too, especially in parts of Europe where that hasn't been taken off yet. And we plan, for instance, in the context of the Just Transition Fund, to spend extra energy and money on those developments. All in all, to be brief, because I'm ready to discuss further in the second half of this seminar, to be brief, we did commit ourselves to making those objectives of the European Union a reality. We do acknowledge that wind energy is an important, if not the most important part of it, so we need each other. And I'm looking forward to cooperation in the next 10 to 20 years.
Thank you very much indeed, Diederik. Now, to continue the presentation of today's new report, I'm delighted to give the floor to the CEO of Vattenfall Wind, Gunnar Gröbler. Gunnar, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Giles, and thanks for having me. Good morning, everybody. And I can only echo what Diederik just said. It's an impressive performance that we have seen so far, but to add to that, the contribution of wind goes well beyond the generation of economic activity only. What we're seeing right now is that wind pays roughly 5 billion in taxes to EU economy, including 1 billion in local taxes and other payments benefiting communities. So if we take one example, for example, in Spain, a wind farm pays normally 15% of their revenues to local government. And in fact, in some regions, in, for example, Galicia, 90% of their revenues, of their budget, is generated from taxes paid by local wind farms. And authorities often involve the community on how to spend the revenues. An example here from Italy, from the municipality of Tula, there the tax income from the Saturina Manna wind park was used to reduce municipal taxes for the 1,600 households, including the elimination of the personal income and real estate tax. And the municipality even goes beyond there, as it also invested into student grants and the renovation of local sport facilities. As you all know, wind farms are often located in rural and even remote areas with low investment activity. The benefits created through those wind farms are really important for these communities that are cut off, at least in some parts, cut off from the fast-growing metropolitan areas that have benefited more from the globalized economy. As an example here, I would like to mention Greece, the wind farm project in the south of Ia island, which contributed with 82 million to the local economy. And that money has been used actually to provide financial aid to local firefighters, supported emergency flood defense projects, and provide supplies to local hospital. Also here, a direct benefit of that wind farm to local economy, to local needs. But next to local taxes, a lot of wind farms also voluntarily offer specific financial benefits to local residents and to especially residents that actively contribute to the just energy transition. As an example, here in the picture you see here is the Pennycamoedd wind farm in the south of Wales, which we as Vattenfall operate. Here we have established a community benefit fund that with an annual budget of roughly 1.8 million pounds up until 2043 supports community activities, and that fund is not run by Vattenfall, not run by the wind farm, but by a separate body, and it helps, for example, local entrepreneurs to develop tourism in an area that is known actually as former mining area in the south of Wales, in the valleys there. So really showing the energy transition very locally in an area that has been dependent on the former form of energy, coal, to something that is new. In parallel, we also now recently set up a local COVID-19 emergency fund to help organizations and entrepreneurs facing short-term cash flow issues or even risk of closure. So again, a very local support and connection of that wind farm to the region and to the people living close by. Another form of interaction is actually that community ownership. So where we actually invite locals to take a stake in the wind farm. The wind farm you're seeing here is the Zeewolde wind farm in the Netherlands. It's a repowering project replacing 220 old turbines with just 91 new ones. And of course, more powerful ones. The output actually is threefold to the old one. I just realized we have a bit of a different order in the slides. What the picture you're seeing here is Königshöfner Höhe, which is a German wind farm. Let me finish on the Zeewolde so that we don't mix it up here. Zeewolde is a wind farm where actually citizens have been invited to invest in that wind farm for as little as 500 euros, right? So with 500 euros, you already could invest into that wind farm and also then financially benefit from the financial success of that wind farm. And just to underline that, the wind farm will actually produce 3 times more electricity as the 220 old wind turbines that have been replaced by the new ones. Coming back to the German example, the Königshöfner Höhe wind farm, which is run and operated by our colleagues from RWE Renewables. here we also have an example of community ownership from the city of Bedburg in Germany, which is close by, and which has collaborated with RWE to build this wind farm, and by that revitalize an area of an old open cast mine, the open cast mine of Garzweiler. This 110 million of investment, I think, is an excellent example of a project bringing again stimulus to a region directly affected by the energy transition. A bit a similar example than the one in South Wales. Again, a region that moves from coal into the new world, into renewables, and by that is directly supporting also the energy transition. Our experience here from that project, but also from many others that we have around Europe, is that involving the community, engaging with local actors, and activating the local economy is central, has proven to be central, and will also be central going forward to any success of the energy transition.
Thank you very much, Gunnar. To respond to what you've just heard from Gunnar, I'm now delighted to give the floor to the Energy Minister of Lithuania, Žygimantas Vaičiūnas. Minister, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Giles. First of all, congratulations for WindEurope and you, Giles, in particular for launching this flagship report. It cannot be better timing. This is really the best time, and having in mind that while others are discussing the importance of this Green Deal, you are doing really a practical job on making this report. And this is also the best timing, having in mind that this Wednesday, EU countries got the European Commission evaluation of these individual national energy and climate plans. And today, European leaders discussing the things on this transition. And of course, December will be very critical for us to agree on the European level. But here, I think this is, first of all, I believe and I wish that this flagship report could be like the energy Bible for all this recovery period, and also for achieving the Green Deal objectives. So on all the levels, on the local one, national and EU level. But here I would like to pass clear three messages. So first of all, this is really the case that while we are talking about this new ambitions and increasing of ambition of from 40% reduction to 55% reduction target. So this is of course the wind. Wind could be really a huge potential for the future, because all the other measures are really critical, but this is most important and the cost efficient. The second thing is, of course, that we are talking about the strategic value change in Europe. And here, of course, I'm glad that Lithuania, together with the 7 other European countries, applied for the European Commission to make this really for the solar and wind energy as a strategic value change in Europe, because this is very critical element while we are talking about this gap between the national energy and climate plans implementation, the most ambition plans and so-called the low scenario. So this would be really critical for us and for our industry to be the part, to be the ally of this transition. And last but not the least, just to ensure and to emphasize the importance of the local communities. Later on, we will discuss this question also, but I'm really sharing the view that involvement of the local communities is very critical. And here, of course, the WindEurope is making good efforts and sharing the experience. And just from the Lithuanian example, we see that it is very important to show how the taxes are going for the local communities, not only on the percentages level, but also what concrete objects or what the concrete added value of this, just to show that this was thanks to the wind development in their communities. And here, of course, also what we are doing, we're also making some efforts of financing in addition. meaning, for example, that we are getting some financing from the statistical transfer agreement with Luxembourg. So this financing is a special fund which is dedicated and supports the local community's efforts. So local community really could have the ownership of the wind turbine together with the support from the state. And just the last point, it's very important to show good examples. And just last week in Lithuania, for example, we made the grant or just awarded the municipality, which is the most has the most favorable framework for the development of renewables and especially for the wind power. So that's very important, and that shows the good example for others how to follow. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Minister. Now, to complete the presentation of the new WindEurope report, I'm pleased to give the floor to the chairman of WindEurope and the CEO of MHI Vestas, Philippe Cavafian. Philippe, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Giles, for the invitation to be here today to discuss the fantastic opportunity that exists in Europe and outline some of WindEurope thoughts on how to get there. And thank you, Manuela Aripa, for joining us. I look very much forward to hearing your response at the end of our presentation. By implementing the Green Deal, national governments have a chance to ensure Europe remains a world leader in wind, building on a solid foundation to contribute to communities across the continent. If countries can realize their 2030 national energy and climate plans, Europe will have twice the wind capacity it has today. Wind energy will then account for 30% of our total demand for electricity. On the second column on the chart, you can see that the National Energy Climate Plan scenario reaching 397 gigawatt of wind would mean 450,000 people employed in the wind industry by the end of this decade. But as it stands today, the national energy and climate plans do not include the policy reforms that are needed for governments to deliver on these commitments. Governments do not say how they are going to simplify their rules and procedures for the permitting of new and repowered wind farms. Current rules and procedures are too complex to deliver the volume which have been committed in the national plans. And in certain cases, national governments don't give enough visibility on auctions or fail to provide the revenue stabilization that will unlock the necessary investment. If governments don't address this, we will end at the low scenario that you see on the right side of the chart. Apart from less wind in the system, Europe will simply struggle to reach climate neutrality by 2050. And it means, of course, far fewer jobs. Europe will lose 1/3, 30% of the current onshore wind jobs, and job creation in offshore wind would be reduced by half. In short, there would be almost 170,000 fewer people employed in the European wind sector by the end of the decade with the low scenario. We can and we must do better. Here are our recommendations for Europe to deliver on the Green Deal and extract the most benefit from our abundant wind resource. First, we must get permitting right. National governments must simplify their permitting rules and procedures for wind project and grid expansion. Crucially, they must make sure that permitting authorities have the resources they need to consent enough wind sites in a timely manner. We must have clear auction schedules. National governments need to provide investors with visibility and certainty on the wind energy volumes that will be deployed over the next decade. We need clear auction schedules, and those auctions should ensure that winning projects generate stable revenues. We must create certainty for the continued investment. Contracts for difference are the best way to do that. CFDs are also good for society because governments get paid back as well as paying out. Adopting a CFD model also reduces the cost of finance for the projects. Achieving climate neutrality requires renewable-based electrification. The EU and national governments must work together to boost the renewable-based direct electrification for transport, heating, industrial processes by adapting regulation and tax regime. We also need support for renewable hydrogen projects to enable the decarbonization or hard to abate industrial sectors such as steel or cement production. We must invest in climate-proof infrastructure by planning infrastructure that will help us achieve a climate-neutral energy system. The EU's Connecting Europe facility must accelerate the deployment of electricity grids. And the offshore renewable energy strategy must become the master plan for delivering 450 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2050, including the right maritime spatial planning and the build out of an optimized and meshed offshore grid. Europe must remain a global leader in wind. We should focus on increasing R&D in the technology that will deliver the Green Deal, particularly for onshore wind, which has been somehow neglected in the recent years. We need continued investment in education and skill programs so Europe has enough qualified talent and people to deliver the energy transition, what we call the talent fabric. Wind is due to become a federating industry. Our trade policies must enable the European wind industry to draw on global supply chain and compete in the non-EU markets, because we are competing against companies benefiting from state-backed financing. Wind energy must remain a central pillar of Europe's economic and climate recovery. At this critical time, when the EU needs to agree on a credible trajectory towards climate neutrality, there is no better accelerator for our recovery and our chances to deliver the Green Deal than certainty and stability for investors. Thank you very much for your support. With that, I would like to invite Manuela Ripa to respond.
Thank you, Philippe. Last week, the European Parliament voted in favor of higher CO2 reduction targets until 2030, 60% instead of 55%. I wholeheartedly supported this target of 60%. I even would have preferred to go higher. Why? Because based on all the information that we have at hand, we need to admit that it is technically feasible. Yet there are several preconditions. We need to have a close look to our way of life, as there are many sources of emissions. For instance, industrial animal farming. The methane strategy, which has been presented yesterday by Commissioner Kadri Simpson in the ITRE committee, points out that the bulk of emissions stem from eating too much meat. So we definitely have to eat less or not. At the same time, we need to ramp up renewable energy production. In order to get there, we need massive funding. This is for the benefit of our climate, but also for our economy. Philippe and also Pierre pointed out to what extent the wind energy will boost the EU economy. What you do here is the European Green Deal at its best. This is why your activities should be at the focus of Next Generation EU. Only if we really take this seriously, European countries can keep the impressive 42% of the global wind energy market and stay global leaders. We are talking about a systemic change here. It is high time to change from fossil energy to renewable energy. It is time to support every effort into that direction, which include also many circular elements. And let me highlight on this one, the steel that you're using, Philippe, nowadays has various countries of origin. Unfortunately, our economic schemes favor the cheapest solution, which in many cases come from Asian countries. I am the only representative in the European Parliament of the German region Saarland. We have a considerable production of special steel in our region, also designed for wind turbines. As we all know, especially offshore favors the regional European production, as the pieces that you need to be installed are huge and transport is very costly. 3 questions now. What if we now introduce a new production of steel without coal and based on renewable electricity? What if the resulting steel becomes more expensive? What if we do not introduce a carbon border mechanism to support the emissions-free steel production? In other words, we need to have a coherent, a systemic approach. It includes to produce the steel needed for additional installation based on emission-free methods, hopefully produced in Europe. It goes without saying that this will be more expensive, and the extra costs, not only in CapEx, but also in OpEx, will need to be covered, not forever, of course, but at least for a transition period. I say this also addressing Diederik, who is well known for his commitment to make the European Green Deal a success. This circular aspect will be a very important part of this success. It reduces emissions, it enhances more renewable energy, and at the same time, it creates additional sustainable quality jobs in Europe. However, if this is to be realized, we need urgently to develop a new strategy for state aid, allowing the extra costs to be covered by a support of OpEx. Contracts of difference, or for difference, as mentioned by Philippe, are an interesting tool in this aspect, but possibly not enough. So in my view, state aid rules need a fundamental change in this transition period. These were my comments on Philippe's presentation. However, allow me one critical and final remark. I was missing in your presentation at least the mentioning of biodiversity protection, both onshore and offshore. I was happy to read in the Baltic Sea Offshore Wind Declaration that there is a plan to develop a coordinated approach to maritime planning, taking environmental protection into account, especially with the view on the offshore strategy of the Commission. What will be your contribution as wind industry to protect sea mammals like whales, dolphins, and alike? Many thanks for your attention and happy to discuss with you.
Thank you very much indeed, Manuela. Gunnar, in a moment, I will ask you to respond to what Manuela has said about biodiversity. But first, Diederik, I would like to invite you to respond to Manuela's points, including what she said about the state aid regime. Diederik.
Yeah, that's a pertinent point. We've seen, especially within this COVID-19 crisis, that we need to overhaul our state aid strategy as a whole, but specifically state aid regulations for energy and environment. And that's also why we plan to revise those this or next year. Depends a little on the schedules that we can maintain. And what we aim to do in the revised state aid regulations is indeed exactly what Manuela and others have pointed out. We need to be able to promote renewable energy, circular economy, clean steel production, and sometimes you need state aid for that. At the same time, we need to be aware of the fact that not every country in Europe has the same ability to provide state aid to companies. Germany is much better equipped to do that than, for instance, countries in Eastern Europe or Southern Europe. So we have to balance 2 objectives here: to create a renewable future, a sustainable future, and to create a just and fair and evenly distributed Europe. I'm convinced we can, but it's a complicated knot that we have to untie here. However, as Manuela said, we are committed to make the Green Deal a success, and we know that without revised state aid regulations, we will not make it a success. So here we are, committed to make those regulations better.
Thank you, Diederik. Gunnar, would you like to respond to what Manuela said about biodiversity?
You can hear me? I'm happy to respond to that, and thank you for mentioning it. And I think you have a very important point here. But rest assured that biodiversity is at the core of what we do in many dimensions, and not only in offshore. The same goes for onshore as well. As we know that we have a responsibility here as an industry and as operators, and we are sort of reminded of that responsibility in each and every project, in all the local discussions we're having, and we're adopting to that. And there's a lot of work ongoing on WindEurope level, but also with the different operators and developers, as well as also the supply industry. But it is a two-way street here we're looking at. It's not only to look at the industry. I think you as policymakers can also help a great deal on the permitting side, for us also to get a certainty in the permitting, because what we're seeing right now is very different rules and regulation around biodiversity and environmental protection, where I would say a more sort of coherent approach across Europe would help a great deal also for us as an industry, to bring the topic forward, but also to ultimately reach the goal of the European Green Deal.
Thank you very much indeed, Gunnar. Diederik, the national energy and climate plans are central to all of this. Our report today shows that if member states implement them properly, the number of jobs in wind will grow from 300,000 today to 450,000 in 2030. But if member states do not implement them properly, crucially, if they do not fill in the gaps that many of their plans have on detailed policy measures, on auctions, simplifying permitting, then we will actually lose jobs in wind energy in Europe. We will lose 18,000 jobs by 2030. Could you share with us what the Commission are going to be doing over the next 10 years to ensure that member states implement their plans properly and that they fill in the gaps that you yourselves in the Commission in your report this week have identified in the plans as they stand?
Well, first of all, I think the report that we published this week is an essential element in trying to fill those gaps. First of all, filling those gaps starts with identifying them and then calling member states out for not meeting the objectives that we set ourselves. But I'm aware that at the same time, we increased the challenge. So while playing the game, we moved the goalpost. For good reasons, by the way, because we need to be more ambitious on environmental goals. So the report that we produced this week was assessing the national energy and climate plans that are aimed for a 32% renewable energy objectives for 2030. Well, we know that that won't be enough. So I think you have to add a fourth column in your report with the new renewable energy target in there, which will be approximately, we have to assess that carefully and specifically, but we think it will be approximately 38.5 or 39% renewable energy, which means almost a complete renewable electricity system already by 2030, 2035. So while we might be worried about the current state of play in the current national energy and climate plans, we actually have to look beyond that and over that. And I think we cannot stick to 27 national energy policies in the end. I think in order to make this happen, Europe needs to define its one single energy policy, also combining subsidy schemes, incentivizing mechanisms, regulation, offshore connection or offshore stuff, cross-border connections. That's all matters of more than one member state. And if we combine our powers, combine our energy, combine our money, we can do much more. I think what we've done in the last 5 years is gradually growing towards that energy union, but that process hasn't finished at all. We have a long way to go, and it's also one of our ambitions to make that happen in the next decade.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Diederik. Minister, WindEurope and the Commission have analysed all of the national energy and climate plans, and Lithuania's is one of the best. In fact, there's no country in Europe that is expanding its volume of wind energy in relative terms as rapidly as Lithuania. Onshore, and then you plan to start building offshore in a few years' time as well. You made some very interesting comments about how you are working with communities and the incentive measures you have in place, yes, to support municipal governments. Could you say a little bit more about that, please? And perhaps if you could say something also about how you are tackling the biodiversity issues that Manuela raised.
Okay, thank you. First of all, as you said, this is a quite important fact that in Lithuania, currently, the wind power is the major production source of electricity, local production source. And that's why the community and society really supports it. And my message concerning national energy and climate plans is very clear. Yes, we have really ambitious plans and targets. And offshore wind, it is nothing like something nice to have. This is the key element to achieve our targets till 2030. That's why we have very clear plans for the future. We have 3.4 gigawatts potential just 30 kilometers from the shore, and now making all the necessary steps. And as Philippe was referring to the permitting things, also to the clear tenders, auction, and also contract for difference. So everything is there, meaning that on the permitting, we have now new law in the parliament. On the auction, it is clear that in 2023, this will be the tender for the offshore wind, for the first tender for 700 megawatts capacity. And concerning the support scheme, yes, this is contract for difference, and now we are dealing with the European Commission to get the state aid approval. And on the communities, this is very clear that from the first stage, now, of course, on the onshore side, we have more than 500 megawatts capacity. We are installing a new ones, 300 megawatts capacity. And this is one important element, is that even the farmers now are installing these wind turbines. So this is something new in our land, that farmers themselves, they are building this. But from the community level, from that point of view, it's very important from the very start. And now we are working with the communities for the offshore development, that also this will be important for them and to get the real benefits. So this is not about the something like the problems on the visionary scale. This is the question how to make it really affordable for them and how to get the clear revenues from this. So this is in principle. And just concerning the concrete details, it's very important on the permitting stage to have the joint approach of communities, of the institutions which are making permitting, and of the government. And here, of course, now we are making some like joint stakeholders meetings to solve all the necessary issues, because here we have a lot of myths, and we need like some sort of myth busters who could really clearly show that this is wind power, wind energy is really friendly for all the things, for biodiversity and so on.
Thank you very much, Minister. Sven, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Giles. And let me just say apologies that I had these terrible technical problems. I trust Pierre did a great job in presenting my part for me, and then I could listen in ever since Gunnar was taking over. So nice to see you all, and thanks a lot for all your contributions so far. Extremely interesting.
Delighted to see you, Sven. Ladies and gentlemen, Sven Utermöhlen, the Chief Operations Officer of RWE Renewables. Sven, RWE is developing a lot of onshore and offshore wind farms. Would you like to share with everybody your experience on community engagement?
Yes, absolutely. Happy to do that, Giles. And indeed, it is an area which concerns both onshore wind and offshore wind. In onshore wind, I think it's very obvious and clear to everybody, because the wind farms are visible in some way, shape or form, and they clearly impact people in the immediate vicinity of wind farms. What we have been quite successful with in most cases, at least I would say, is to engage with local population and with stakeholder representatives extremely early on, and then throughout the process, from the very early stages of development and then through construction. And one of the key enablers, I think, around engagement is really transparency and information, and really informing the population and stakeholders very transparently about wind farms. And of course, Gunnar gave the example already of community funds. This also plays a role to engage local stakeholders and say, oh, right, we understand that there is something around this wind farm, but there is also something we're getting from it. It can play into helping schools and children to learn more about energy supply, about renewable energy and wind energy in particular. It can be about creating other sources of training people and getting people interested in maybe taking jobs in the wind industry as well. So we have made some very good experiences there. And as I said, it's very similar for offshore wind, even though, at least in many cases, it's not so much a visual impact topic, but still people are just interested in understanding what is happening out there in front of their shorelines. People are interested when it comes to fisheries. They are interested when it comes to diving and just leisure on the sea and sailing boats and so on. And again, it is very, very important, and our experience has been very positive when engaging as transparently as possible and as early as possible. And let me also maybe make a comment to Manuela's well-made point on biodiversity. We have been one of the early adopters of certain technologies. We have been one of the early players to use bubble curtains, for example, and we have developed that technology further. We are currently constructing an offshore wind farm in the German North Sea, where we will use vibropiling instead of the conventional hammering, which should give us further insight into how noise emissions can be reduced and how that can benefit mammals in particular, but also other species in the sea. So I would say, as industry, we are not shy to develop the technologies further and the solutions further that help to protect biodiversity. What clearly helps, though, and I would definitely support what Gunnar said, is a clear and visible framework of what is required, also to create a level playing field when it comes to participating in auctions. So if we know what we have to adhere to in terms of requirements, then it will benefit the industry.
Thank you, Sven. Philippe, Sven has talked about jobs. If all goes to plan, there'll be 150,000 new jobs in wind over the next 10 years. You are recruiting engineers, technicians for your company. Is it easy? Is it difficult? If it's difficult, what should the EU institutions and national governments be doing to improve the skills base of people in Europe that you might wish to employ?
Thank you, Joyce. It is indeed probably the biggest challenge we will have. I start for myself. My job didn't exist when I graduated. You will tell me that I didn't graduate yesterday, but some time ago. But even when I started in the wind industry a few years ago, nobody would have expected such an exponential growth of our sector. So not just wind, but the rest of the infrastructure initiatives that we need for this energy transition in Europe are going to create jobs that people don't even suspect today, in not only the definition, but the magnitude of the job requirements. So what we think we need to focus on is to make sure that the message is conveyed at every level of the education system. So we need to educate the children to picture the world of tomorrow. We need to make sure that apprenticeship is not forgetting that so many technician jobs are going to be created or in our sector. And of course, you know, there's still the R&D, the innovation, and all the way to the advanced research that we need to continue support. So there's a continuous effort to attract and direct all the talents development in what I call the talent fabric. But the fundamental message is we don't need only one specific type of skills. We have a very broad range of situation, and from the biodiversity all the way to the infrastructure project, the logistics, the technical, but also the service activities are driving a very wide range. We have, I just want to give a couple of examples that are very practical. You know, not only my job did not exist, but I'm working today in a company that has more than 3,500 people. Just 6 years after its creation, we were at 300 at the beginning. So we talk about an exponential demand for skills and talent. And the other example is what we do practically in the northeast of Scotland. We're a college where basically we are in a position where we can take young people and put them in practice in a 1 year rotation, and to really hands-on get accustomed to what it is to not only service wind turbines, but also service technician going offshore with all the logistics and all the safety culture that come with it. And I think this is what we need to focus on, which is it's a very wide and massive demand for talent that we need to attract into the new jobs of the energy transition.
Thank you very much, Philippe. Diederik, you mentioned Next Generation EU, the EU recovery plan. Could you share with us a little bit more about how the recovery plan is going to support the expansion of wind energy and also the role of the national recovery and resilience plans?
Well, that's actually very simple and therefore very complicated, because in the EU we never have simple rules. The recovery plan works as follows. We ask 27 member states to develop their own recovery plan, and actually deadline of that, or the starting date of that, is today. So as of today they can deliver their plans to Brussels, and I've seen a few drafts of them already, and they are inspiring and stem up for further optimism. In those plans, you need to address the challenge that we have, and obviously the solutions that you want to implement to address that challenge, and the money that you need for that, and then we will disperse the money. Actually pretty simple. But to make it a bit more coherent and coordinated and in line with the ambition of the Green Deal, we have identified guidelines, so to speak, and say, well, you need to spend at least 37% of that money on climate-related investments. And more specific, we have developed specific flagship projects that we think every member state should embark on. One of those flagship projects is called Power Up, or whatever the name will be in the end. We're not that good in advertising, but Power Up is the working title. And that is actually the combination between clean energy and hydrogen production. We think there is a huge opportunity for Europe to speed up the development of clean hydrogen production, which means investing in electrolyzer technology, investing in all types of implementing the use of hydrogen, and obviously investing in huge amounts of clean energy, clean electricity production to power those electrolyzers. Offshore wind comes to mind, obviously, there. So what I think should or needs to happen is 27 member states working each on their own plan, but collectively delivering one big European project, which is called Power Up, clean electricity combined with hydrogen production. And as I said, I've already seen plans from France, Germany, Portugal, Italy, which go directly into that direction. So I think there's more to come.
Thank you, Diederik. Minister, would you like to say something about Lithuania's recovery and resilience plan?
Yes, thank you. This is really the case that this is good financial momentum having in mind, and really we are thankful for the Commission for this decision to have this Recovery and Resilience Fund. So in our case, we are already planned almost half of this fund will be dedicated for the clean energy transition. And of course, this is the best method because now we can plan very clearly to fill these gaps, to fill these financial gaps. And this is really the historical momentum probably for all the Europe. And as it was mentioned, especially for some of the projects like hydrogen and so on, this is also very important. In our case, we are also making and planning investments also for the offshore wind, for the connectivity, but also this is very important to choose the most efficient method, having in mind that we have our national plans. We are working bilaterally, for example, with Luxembourg signing the MOU on the offshore development, also working regionally. And just several weeks ago, we signed this MOU on declaration between the BEMIP countries in the Baltic Sea to coordinate our plans. And this is really the case that connectivity to the grid of the offshore is really financially is really challenging. So for this target, we have to use all these potential funds.
Thank you, Minister. Manuela, I'm going to give the last word to you. Some concluding observations.
Oh, thank you very much for this. Thanks, Gunnar and Sven, that you tackled and spoke so much on biodiversity. We have to take it very seriously, and I'm absolutely your opinion. We need a coherent approach because we should not be blind on one eye just because we want to see with the other one. So it's a holistic approach. We have to see every detail, and maybe you can elaborate further on the biodiversity issue. I can help as a policymaker that you get a coherent approach, but here often, and Diederik will agree here with me, the ball lies in the field of the member states because they are not coherent in many things. And I agree with Diederik, we have a long way to go. I'm happy to hear that he wants to change the state aid rules because this is absolutely fundamental for this transition. The EP, the European Parliament, supports fully the Green Deal. We need clear targets. We need also a relevant tracing and tracking, and unfortunately it was no time to discuss this one, but I was mentioning green clean steel and also steel made in Europe that we needed for also wind turbines, and I would like that you include this in your business plan. So to wrap up, it's our last chance. We need to tackle climate change. We need a big transformation. You will get the support from me, I hope, in the European Parliament, that you get the money, but please see the whole picture, and I hope I'm happy to follow this transformation. It's a very exciting moment in our European history. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Manuela. Thank you to you, Diederik. Minister, thank you very much to you. WindEurope colleagues, thank you for taking part and for your contributions. And to all of you listening into this webinar, thank you very much for your attention and company for this last hour. Have a good day. Have a good weekend. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.